Hello everyone, my name is Louisette Lontang and I'm here today to talk to you about these reports. This is the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. Every 2 years they meet with Canadians to discuss how we want our Canada pension plans invested. What things do we care about? Where would we like the funds to go? How do we want the decisions to be made in regards to where and how our pension plan is managed? So I went to the meeting in Toronto today and I took some notes and I want to relay it to you because when it comes down to it, money shapes a lot of the world. It shapes it in terms of our policies, in terms of governance, in terms of even conflict issues, Indigenous rights, labor laws, everything can be influenced by how our monies are spent. This is a critical matter and not enough Canadians are engaged. I went to the meeting in Toronto today and I was probably 1 in 10 people who actually showed up as members of the public. And considering the fact that we're sitting here having a dialogue on how we intend to use $278 billion of our money, and so few people show up, I think it's an issue that really has to be brought forward. That's why I'm making this video. I'm going to tell Canadians what's going on here, and I want you guys to become engaged, learn what's happening with Indigenous issues, with legal issues, with warfare, the whole works. So that's what this video is for. I encourage you to watch it and pass it on. Now here's how it begins. The CPP was started in 1966 to help people to retire and have money to be able to afford living out the rest of their years. Later on, a problem emerged because the aging population was outnumbering the working force. So they weren't coming up with enough money to be able to support the aging population. So in 1997, the CPPIB, that's the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, was created to research investments and to put money towards growth with the target of long-term success of 4%. That's what it would take to cover retirees. So over the last 10 years, the performance has been 5.1%. which is over the targeted goal, and that's considered a pretty good success. That's after taxes and after inflation. It was 7.8 nominal, which means before those numbers were taken off. Now, the outgoing CEO of the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board is Mark Wiseman, and he said a quote which basically encapsulates how he sees their goal. He states, quote unquote, "No dollar to be spent unless it goes to making more dollars for Canadians." Sounds like a worthy goal. So it goes on here. The new CEO who's going to be replacing him is named Mark Mashin. And he states that CPPIB is looking to secure the best investments. Okay, so that's the goal of the two guys. Now, the question came quickly when the forum opened up to the public. Folks asked, what about climate change? How is the CPPIB responding to climate change? Well, they said they have a working committee to study the long-term economic impacts. The working committee is led by a lady named Stephanie Least, who's on the board. They're also working on diversifying their assets to reduce risk. So they're investing in all kinds of different things, not just fossil fuels, but definitely a whole bunch of other things. They're also looking for opportunities to address the issue, like investing in green energy. And they are looking for top-down, bottom-up solutions. So emerging technologies as well as policies trickling down. They're looking at the opportunities for investments regarding those. And then another question was asked. Why is CPPIB investing in fracking in Oklahoma when the public there clearly didn't want the fracking? Now, their response was, with Encana, we are contracted to purchase $900 million for fracking. All we care is to maximize returns. Make of that statement what you will. Okay, so what happens is they are contracted to purchase. over a long-term investment. So this decision may have been made before they knew the risks. These kinds of decisions have a long-term contract that they can't really back out of easily. So there's a lot of risks assumed with this, and they're stating in a sense that the diversification of assets will help absorb some of that. Mark Wiseman, the CEO, stated, keep in mind these are long-term investments. If we had to manage it annually, though, it would change the way we work. So if they had to manage our assets annually rather than long-term, they could switch things faster. That's what I'm taking from that. I'm not sure if that's what he meant, but that's what I'm getting. So then he clarifies the fact that Canada pension plans and policies are created and governed by the federal and provincial government. So our MPs and MPPs are creating the laws that control his department. They can't make their own laws at the CPPIB, okay? So they can't send checks out either. So all they can do is implement the rules as our elected officials give them. Okay, so that's important. Because if we want to have an influence on how they run things, contact your MP and MPP. That's how it's done. Now, a question of human rights was raised, as well as Indigenous rights, because Canada's mining overseas has been connected to some violations of human rights laws and Indigenous laws. And the CPPIB stated in response, companies, in their view, have less value if they break the law. They want to integrate values into their investments. So they look at Indigenous rights and labor rights as part of the information they assess before they make a decision. And they said if there are any concerns that the public has specific to these issues, then they are welcome to write to the CPPIB. And the email for that is contact, CONTACT, at cppib.com. That's where you reach them. Contact at cppib.com. So another question asked at the event, would CPPIB be willing to divest fossil fuels to address climate issues? Now this is an interesting response. They stated, CPPIB said, we don't believe in divestments of asset class. So they will not divest based on all the oil sector or natural gas sector or whatever. They said we don't believe in divestment by asset class, but we look to impacts and engage as shareholder to encourage a change of behavior. They said we believe in high quality disclosure of risk and disclosure of compensation and disclosure of Indigenous relations, so that if there are issues, they want to be informed fully on these issues. Now, two people spoke about Canada's role with war investments. One voiced concern that Canada was spending over $1 billion in weaponry, including F-35s and tanks that are currently being purchased and used by Saudi Arabia against another country. It states here that others also voiced concerns with regards to heavy spending for Israel, for Israel's military, Israel's prison systems, as well as police surveillance. These are things that our pensions are currently funding up to $5.5 billion on. Okay, so that's two concerns there. One is an investment of over $1 billion to weaponry, just general weaponry production, sales, manufacturing, distribution, all those things. The other one is $5.5 billion for Israel's police surveillance and things like that. Okay, so it's quite a chunk. And the response of CPPIB was the following. They said, we won't invest in things that are illegal. He said, cluster bomb ammunitions, we're not involved with that. Sanctions in Zimbabwe, we won't touch that. But they said again, if people have concerns with how these funds are being spent, write to your MP, MPP, and contact write to the contact person, contact@cppib.com. Okay, so if you have issue with Canada funding Israeli war issues or funding war in general, it's a good time to talk up. Diversity of market. Now, I was the one who raised that concern with them because every time a heavy question came regarding the oil or fossil fuel sector, CPPIB was very quick to say, don't worry, we have a diversity of investments, a diversity of market shares, and we're resilient type concept, right? Well, when I reviewed the weapons sales and the manufacturers of those weapons, what I found is that I would type in the name of the weapons company on the NASDAQ board, and then I would look at industry holders of those shares. And it would take me to things like State Street, Alphabet, BlackRock. And when you look at the investors of those companies, you always find Microsoft, Apple, Johnson & Johnson, Microsoft, Apple, Johnson & Johnson, Microsoft, Apple, Johnson & Johnson. All these firms kept coming over again and again and again. In fact, when I did a lot of market research on different firms like the Canada Pension Plan invests in, it comes up with the same core companies funding the same over and over again. So we're dealing with an issue right now where how diverse is our market if Apple owns a huge chunk of the kind of things we're investing in, and Microsoft owns a huge chunk of the kind of things we're investing in, and GE and Johnson & Johnson investing in the same kind of things we're investing. How diverse is it? And the bigger concern I have is the fact that most of these companies are also offshore taxes. Okay, so I'm thinking here that if we invest $1 billion or over $1 billion in weapons, what are the costs of using them? Okay, so I looked to the Canadian Development site, and I found out that we have $5.8 billion in foreign aid that's being handed out to areas where we've had conflict, Afghanistan, and there's money being doled out to the Ukraine and to all these countries in a state of war and distress. So here's how it comes out. If the statement of the CEO was correct, every dollar we spend should be coming back more money for Canadians. I don't see that equation happening with the weapons sales, because we're spending over $1 billion and we're not including the $5.8 billion in aid. And we're not including the fact that it's going to profit companies that have offshore taxes. We don't see that money back in Canada. How much are we actually seeing come back to Canada from these investments? I see a lot of externalization of costs that are not being included with this. Foreign aid has to be up there. They have to figure out, if we use the weapon, how much do we have to pay to rebuild these communities? How much do we give away in foreign aid to support them after we've destroyed them? That has to be worked in. I don't see a good economic model for destroying communities. I think that has to stop. Another question somebody had was, why do we only invest 19.1% of CPPIB funds in Canada? Get a load of that. So here's one of the pamphlets we received, A Brief Introduction to Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. And it's got the general info. So basically the blue line represents our Canada Pension Plan funds, and over 50% of the growth that's taken place is what we've earned. And you can see how it's sort of distributed in this thing here. This was the economic crisis that hit around 2009. So we've weathered fairly well for the most part, but here's the part that I found particularly disturbing, because it's showing where our investment monies are going. Over 80% of our current investments are being invested outside of Canada. So this is the pool that we have currently. $278 billion have been gathered of our Canada Pension Plan, and only 19.1% is actually spent in Canada. Okay, less than 20% is being invested here in Canada. of this huge chunk that taxpayers have saved all over, we have 39.7% invested in the United States. That's 39.7. You may as well say 40%. Okay? So that's where our money's going. It's not staying in Canada, it's going to the US. And it's also going here. Now, 12% is Europe, but for some reason they've managed to exclude the UK. This represents the UK. So if your Europe includes the UK, then they're earning a total of 19.5% of our 278 billion. That's even more than we make. So US and the UK US and Europe are making more than what we earn in terms of the jobs and the revenues and the benefits of this development money. We have over here, Asia is this one here, 19.1%. And for some reason, they separate it from Japan, which is 6.5%. So together, that would be 15.6% of our money is going to Asia, with Japan included. Now over here, these two tiny little wedges we've got up here, 2.9% represents our investments in Latin America, whereas 2.8 is our investments in Australia. And this little chunk here, 0.4, I don't know what that's going to. All it has is the word other. Other. As a Canada Pension Plan person who's contributed to this fund, I'd like to know what other means. But yeah, so that's what we're dealing with right now. Now, I can only speak for myself. Like, I earned Canada Pension Plan money, and I was shocked when I found out that only 19.1% was being reinvested in Canada. Part of me was hoping that money would be working to help build jobs and infrastructure and pay for hospitals and good things in Canada. And it was heartbreaking to see this, because what am I doing? Working all my life to see benefits going to the States and such? Yes, I know these are equities. Okay, this is retirement funds that'll eventually come back should I survive to live enough to claim my pension. But is this really a good way to help our kids? Is this really a good way to help the totality of Canadian society by investing so much money outside the country for such an extended period of time, over such a long time? The way that they explained it, though, the Canada Pension Plan stated the reason they invest so much money outside Canada is because Canada only represents 3% of the investable market. But they choose to invest 6%. So even this model that you see here is, in their view, a generous model. Okay? So that's how it's laid out. And they said that we have to diversify our assets because Canada basically is at risk right now with our oil sands and everything else going. They never stated the oil sands was a risk, but I don't think they need to. And that's how our money is being distributed. So I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to listen to this and to learn about our Canada Pension Plan and how it's being used. And I'd like to state in closing that if you're concerned with how the Canada Pension Plan is being used for weaponry, for the Israeli prisons and surveillance and such, or if you're concerned about the fact that the CPP states they're not supposed to be involved with illegal activity, but Canada is still investing in the manufacturing of tanks for Saudi Arabia. They may be related to investments in pipelines that have been approved without Indigenous consent. Indigenous rights, labor rights are still being infringed upon in Canadian investments abroad. If those issues are of a concern to you, then I really, really want you to contact your Minister of Provincial Parliament. It's especially important because in 2 weeks from now, around July the 20th, 2016, there will be a special meeting of the premiers in Vancouver to discuss the Canada Pension Plan. Now is the perfect time for people to contact their provincial officials to tell them how we want our money to be invested and how we don't want it to be invested. So please have a say. Contact your provincial representatives and be sure to contact the CPPIB at contact@cppib.com. Please speak up. It's your money and you have the right to have a say in how it's spent. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate what you're doing. My name's Louisette Lontang, and I'm a Métis Mi'kmaq mother from Waterloo, just giving you the spin on what I saw. I have no conflict of interest in this issue outside of being a person who has contributed to CPP. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.